Judging by the way the last one ended, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, I think this is the one where Johan dies. Welcome back to another monster video, everybody. Monster Volume 5. We are halfway through, I think. I think this is the halfway point in the story. Maybe. But as usual, before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say thank you to all of my patrons that support me here in what I do on this channel. Thank you guys all so very much. Also, before we get started, I just want to say I was shocked at just how intense the opening section for this was. I don't know why I didn't expect it to be as exhilarating as it turned out to be. Like, it legitimately surprised me when I was like, oh my gosh, like it's a very intense opener for this volume. Like, the whole 6-7 chapters of just nonstop action, or at least intensity. Maybe not action is the right word. But we ultimately pick up right where we left off, with Tenma laying on top of the bookshelves, getting ready to take his shot. And he's going to lay there basically the whole night, waiting for the next morning to get there. And this whole section is going to be intercut with memories of him from his childhood, and memories of him saving Johan. And Nina working it all out. And the one old man goes and confronts the other old man. But that old man's already figured out that something's not quite right with Johan, and he doesn't really care. So he doesn't really care what the other old man has to say about it. And then we get this really neat scene with the BKA man as he's kind of doing his weird little investigation with his little tappity fingers. And he goes on some big speech about how it's not possible for somebody to not leave any physical evidence behind whatsoever, because it's not possible for a man to do. It would have to be some kind of a demon. Then he is introduced to a room where there is direct proof that Johan just stayed there, and now he's standing in the middle of a room with absolutely no physical evidence that anyone was ever there, completely disproving everything that he just said. So he kind of gets this look of almost excitement when he realizes that this person does exist, or at least he's starting to put together that Johan's a real person, and he is capable of doing things that the BKA man didn't even think were possible. So he looks like his interest is piqued, we shall say. Now, just as the ceremony is starting, the little nerdy girl comes up and shows Nina a picture book. The picture book that made the boy that looks shockingly like Nina, made him pass out. And this is what I've been waiting for. Like I said in the end of the last one, we all know that Johan's not going to die yet because we're only halfway through the story. But I really wanted to know what was inside of that book, and here we are. And I got super stoked. Also, it explains this weird little picture on the front of the volume here, which I'm glad I got an answer to why that thing's there, because that was just weird. Anyway. Once upon a time, there was a monster who had no name. All right, we're not going to do that. Honestly, I'd love to sit here and read this whole thing to you, make a whole little video out of it, but it would take up too much time in the video. So let's paraphrase. Anyway, so the monster's going to split himself in two, so he can go two separate directions in order to find a name. The one we follow consumes everything in his path, either consuming or destroying everything he touches, until he finds a boy one day who he's content to be in for a while and takes his name. Until one day his hunger finally takes over and he just can't take it anymore, and he ends up eating the boy's father and everything around him, just in time to come back in touch with his other self, who has simply learned to be content with who and what he is, and has ultimately found peace and happiness in doing so. Which makes the monster we followed ultimately consume him. Now, the monster is complete and whole and has a name, but he's all alone, with nothing and no one left in the world to call him by his name. And it was a good name, because it was Johan. And I have so many questions. Is this supposed to be a hint at the inner workings of the story, or the inner secret meaning of what this story is ultimately going to be? Is it just a mini little snapshot of something that's going to ultimately shed light on this greater, grander story as we go forward? That'll be something that we can look back on and, kind of illuminate something that happens later. Or is it going to be some type of piece to Johan's backstory that ultimately plays into who he is and how he became what he is, and maybe even how he chose the name that he chose when he grew up and he doesn't remember? I don't really know. And we're just gonna have to wait and find out. But as a little bubble in and of itself, just a little moral tale that could stand alone by itself, if you pulled it out of here, I really quite enjoyed it. I like it a lot. I like the message. I like the meaning. I'm very satisfied with this section. I like the picture book. I mean, I guess if you want to look at it just as a story in and of itself, it's all in your perspective. You can have the same person go two different ways. One way of accepting who and what you are, and the other way of never being satisfied. One breeds happiness, and the other one breeds, well, just read the picture book. But anyway, at this point, the little nerdy girl tells Nina where Johan is at, so she goes off running to find Johan. Meanwhile, Tenma's over there, all set up to take his shot while he continues to have flashbacks. When suddenly he's ambushed by Roberto! You son of a bitch, Roberto. Also, the old man sends his son away to go back to the apartment to get some envelope while him and Johan go to the ceremony. And then when he gets there, for some really strange reason that I don't entirely understand, because he was just like all gung-ho with Johan, and I don't care if he's a monster or something. And now suddenly he's telling everybody to get into a nice, calm, single-file line and evacuate the building. So he's had a change of heart for, I don't know why. And right then a lady locks all the doors and sets the building on fire. Back over with Tenma and Roberto, they're fighting over the gun. Roberto eventually wins and gets the rifle. Tenma gets his hands on a pistol and pulls it on Roberto, and for the first time ever, pulls the trigger and kills somebody. And before pulling the trigger, his hands were shaking, but after pulling the trigger and after killing Roberto, or as far as we know, he killed Roberto, I have a feeling that son of a bitch will be back. But anyway, after pulling the trigger with Roberto, his hands no longer shake. That's interesting. It's exactly opposite of what I would expect to happen with a man like Tenma. Maybe we'll get some further insight into his character as this moves forward. I don't know. Anyway, now off with the son. He's going to find the envelope that his father sent him to find, and it's actually an envelope about him and his mom and his past and who she was and how he was raised. And the guy's been actually keeping tabs on him for a little while, and he sent him back to find this because he wanted him to know his history and who his real mom was and all of this crap. Now back with Johan, and the old man. Johan sticks his face right in the old man's face, gets eye to eye, and has him look into his eyes. I'm trying really hard not to make this sound like completely choppy as I jump back and forth between the things that are happening, but this is me attempting to smooth it out. This was so rapidly intercut between this person, this person, this person, and this person. It was when I said at the beginning that this was an extremely intense section, it was very intense. We are talking page turner. It was just a lot more than I honestly expected this little mini climax to end up being, which makes me excited about the end of the book series, because if this was that intense, then hopefully the ending is even better. But it was just very fast-paced and very all over the place, but in a good way. But anyway, just as everything's at its absolute peak, Tenma comes running out and he's face to face with Johan, and he hesitates shooting just long enough for Nina to come out and scream at him not to shoot so she can pull her gun. And she hesitates just long enough for Tenma to yell at her not to shoot. And eventually, somehow, in all of this don't shoot business, Johan walks away. And this section was so good and so intense, and it was so 6 chapters of this for it all to culminate in shoot, no, don't shoot, you don't shoot, no, you don't shoot, no, you don't shoot, as Tenma walks away. And I'm not super sure that was a satisfying ending. It was an ending. I'll have to think about it. It might grow on me as time goes on. It might seem like a more appropriate way to end that. But in the moment, I was like, Really? That's it? Give me time. Upon reflection, I've decided all kinds of things hit different. But in the moment, I'm not even going to lie, I was like, aw. But anyway, Tenma shoots the hinges off some doors and saves all the people. Almost all. And in the aftermath of everything, Tenma disappears and Nina ends up with Dieter and the old man, where she starts to remember things about 3 frogs and a bridge. Eventually, after reuniting with his son, the old man's going to send him to give Tenma a message. And apparently Tenma saved the old man from the burning building in all of the commotion. But anyway, he's going to give him a message about a bridge and 3 frogs. Now, in true monster fashion, the next section of the book, basically the rest of the book, is going to be, we're going to introduce a few new characters, and we're going to follow them for a while, and we're just going to kind of ignore and forget about all of our main characters for a while. I'm kidding. I mean, I'm not kidding, but I make it sound worse than it is. Just bear with me. Because we get introduced to a journalist who used to be a spy back when the wall was still up, and he worked for East Germany. And he's investigating a place called Kinderheim. 511 or 511. How do you say it? And he's kind of like an aloof idiot and a persistent optimist all at the same time. And he's just kind of this real goofy, weird, happy-go-lucky character. Come to find out, he's not aloof and he's definitely not an idiot, but he might be a persistent optimist. That might be true. And he just kind of bounces through the story for a while. At one point, he even ends up on a train with Tenma, and he kind of saves Tenma from the guards by giving him a heads up that they're on to him with his fake passport and helps him get off the train. And what makes this section work for me is we leave our main characters behind and we get these new characters, but they're just so much fun to read. They're just really colorful characters that are fun to hang out with all by themselves. And then as we hang out with them and as they weave through their own story, our main characters like Tenma and whatnot are going to kind of pop in and out of this person's story, keeping us engaged on this side story, which is this side character, but keeping us just plugged in enough to the main characters over here that we still stay engaged with the main plot, but we're over here following a side thread, and the side thread is just so much fun to be on that you don't mind that you're not over here with the main group that you feel like maybe sometimes you should be. You're just living in this little world over here, and it's fine. At least it is for me. I enjoy it. I think I've enjoyed all of them so far. But we're always ultimately working our way to the same end goal. So it just kind of works. And at the same time, it kind of gives us a little break from the heaviness that is the main story. It's really just a win-win-win. Anyway, he's going to ultimately hunt down the director of the old Kinderheim orphanage, and he's running another orphanage, apparently, but this time it's like a not evil orphanage instead of an evil orphanage, I think. When the old man is killed by a mysterious young woman, and then our happy optimist guy's kidnapped and tortured, when his torturers are killed by a mysterious young woman. And it is very heavily implied that this mysterious young woman is Nina, although she's kept in shadow every time we see her, so it's not really confirmed, but like I said, heavily implied. When we see at the same time there's a young detective who finds a secret investigation going on inside of his precinct, and he keeps running into Nina at a bar. Tenma shows up in town because this is a place with a bridge and the 3 frogs. And the journalist will ultimately get his hands on the key to the old man's safe deposit box with all of his documents and information from his studies at Kinderheim in it. And just at the end, he hands it off to the young detective. The end. And after what was the most just intense banger of an opening for a book, we're just right back on our multi-threaded journey of tension, espionage, thriller, and intrigue that we've been on the whole time, following new side characters, old friends, and everything else. And I'm just having a wonderful time with it. I could nitpick it to death if I really wanted to. I think I brought up most of my nitpicks about convenience and all of that in all of my other reviews. And I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to keep this one right at an 8. It's just a really good time, and I would just highly recommend it to pretty much anyone. Anyway, as always, the link for my Patreon is in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.